G'day, and I'm Ben. Welcome to Pushing 50. This series, the first part of this series is going to be about some life-threatening experiences that I've gone through in the past, 35 years odd. And we'll be starting with surfing. So, grew up in the eastern suburbs of Sydney, Australia, particularly Bondi and Rose Bay and around that area. And about 32, 33 years ago at the moment, decided to go surfing. A massive southerly change had blown through, which brings a rather large swell. And there's a smaller beach on the eastern suburbs of Sydney called Tamarama. It's only about a half a kilometre wide. It's housed in by cliff faces on both sides. On the northern end of the beach, out in the break area, there's a rock shelf that comes out and then drops off about 15 feet deep or thereabouts, just setting the stage. So with this swell coming through at about 2 to 3 metres, it's pretty large. The beach was actually closed. Should probably mention that. In my youthful wisdom, I decided to go out surfing. Being closed, there was no one else around in the water, so I had the whole break to myself, which was pretty much closing out on most of the sets that were coming through. So I paddled out, and it took a lot of energy to get out. That's the first thing I'll note, that I was expended after getting out the back. Pretty much had to sit there for about 15 minutes or so just to get my energy back. That sort of should have been the first clue that it's probably not the right day to go surfing. Anyway, I thought I'll just catch a couple of waves, have a little bit of fun, and then call it a day, because it was extremely rough. It was choppy. There was 25, 30 knots of wind, 50, 60 kilometres or 30, 35 mile an hour of wind. So it was pretty choppy. The faces weren't clean at all, but decided to give it a go. I caught my first wave, and it was a right-hander, which took me over towards the northern end of the beach, being on the east coast. And the northern end of the beach has that rock shelf that comes out and that vertical component going 15 odd foot deep. Pulled off that wave, first wave of the set. They usually come in 3. And second wave, battled to get out of the first wave to start with, which then the second wave came through. The second wave sunk me down to about 4 foot beneath that rock shelf and pinned me against the vertical wall on that rock shelf. And that's where I stayed for the next 30 seconds odd, because we've got 2 more waves coming through, which were just pushing with phenomenal force against that rock face. My board was up on the surface, just flailing around on my leg rope, which didn't break, which is good, because I've then got a lifeline back up to the surface. After the next 2 waves, I managed to get back up to the surface and climbed on my board, turned around to paddle out again, only to be met with the next set, which was a lot closer. Their frequency was coming a lot quicker than I expected. Even after paddling out, I sort of timed each set. It was like, but this one was a lot closer. The first wave broke on top of me, just next to that rock wall, and it sunk me down to my head, being around 5 foot underwater, and pinned me against that rock with so much force I could hardly move my arms away from the rock face. That's where I stayed for that entire set. So 3 waves of just pounding me and just constant pressure. The pressure would rise and fall in between the sets, but it was still pushing me because that huge amount of water was moving onto that rock shelf. So I was holding my breath, and probably the worst thing you can do when you're underwater is start to panic. Unfortunately, because of the previous 30, 35 seconds I was underwater, I was depleting in oxygen. It was leaving my body rapidly. And I started to panic. Worst thing I could have done, because I was pinned there for about 30 to 45 seconds. It seemed like an hour and a half that I was pinned against this rock wall, but in all honesty, it's only about 30, 35 seconds, 40 seconds max. So finally, the pressure started to subside, and I was able to literally climb up the vertical rock face up to water level again. I grabbed my board, climbed up onto the flat part, looked behind me only to see the next set coming. And I thought, two options. One, turn around and try and head back into it again, or run to a relatively small rock. It's probably 2 meters high and about 3 or 4 meters wide, and hide behind that rock. That was my decision. Run away. Self-preservance. Tried to preserve my longevity at that stage, and I bolted for that rock. Board underhand, ducked behind the rock, just in time for that first wave to wash up and over that rock. And I was literally encapsulated in this little bubble of air with the water rushing over the top. And then the next wave, again, rushing over the top. And then the third and final wave of that set, same thing again. I then looked and I saw a bit more of a gap between the next set, which probably would have cleaned me up if I didn't stay in the same spot, but I was able to climb up to a higher point, sort of on the cliff face now, or bottom of the cliff face, which had a little track that I could actually go up and get out of the break zone. So managed to get out of the break zone, absolutely beside myself. I'd nearly drowned. I nearly died. Simple as that. I was exhausted after only 5 minutes of enduring what had just happened. And my brain was in overload. So short of hyperventilating, I managed to get out of that area, but not happy with myself, not happy with surfing, didn't like what just happened at all, as you can imagine. So my next movements were to go back to my car, strip out of my wetsuit, get some warm clothes on. I was literally semi in shock at that stage. Put my board in the car, little Mazda 323, so front seats laid down and board slots in beside me. Jumped in my car. I drove back to the shop that I bought the board from, walked in, and I said, "How much will you give me for my board?" I bought it for like $500, $600, only a week or two before. And they said $100, and I said, "Take it." I took the $100 and left. And that was probably the closest I've ever come to drowning, and not a nice experience. In recollection, probably should have got back on the horse that threw me, but that was it. I'd had enough, absolutely enough, and I survived. However, that's just the first thing over 50 years that really stands out. We've got a number of other things to go through, which will be in the up and coming segments of Pushing 50. So thanks for tuning in. I'm Ben, and hopefully you'll come back for the next one, because they do get better, including sharks and close calls with aviation. Thanks again. Pushing 50.